So I can continuing. So I read the next 20 pages of the Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, and it's getting very sort of emotional. It starts on a starts off on an emotional scale. Gladwell gives the backstory of Christopher Langan, who in the previous chapter he describes as a genius, very high IQ, everything that if you give his resume, it'll seem like, oh, this person should be very successful, but it turns out that he's not. So in this chapter, he goes deeper and analyzes just what's the reason behind him not being successful. So he begins with uh, explaining how Christopher Langan's childhood was, where his father was an alcoholic. His father used to abuse him physically. His mother wasn't there half the time. She got married to three or four different men, uh, and each of them were not successful. Uh, and and his mother had many kids, and she ran two jobs, so she never actually spent a lot of time with Christopher. And the same thing with his alcoholic father, who wasn't even his father, was his stepfather, because his real father ran away when he was just I think 2 years old. So overall, his childhood was very very tragic, and but he still managed to get into a university. I think it was Reed University, which is overall not a bad university. It's middle class, and he got a full ride, a full scholarship. So he started studying there, but then something happened with his paperwork. His mom didn't file his paperwork properly, so he got kicked out of the university, which is another tragedy to add on to everything else that has been going on in his life. So then he started working as a construction worker, which is so far below his intellectual capabilities, right? And that just adds on to the overall irony, overall tragedy of his life. And so then later he applies to Montana State University, and he studies there until until his car breaks down. So he doesn't know have a way to get to the university anymore. So he tries to talk to the admin and tries to find a campus that's closer to his home. This way he doesn't have to commute. But the admin immediately says no. So Langan gets frustrated and he just decides to drop out. And from that point on, he has never actually completed his post-secondary education, and he has no college degree. So later in his life, when he tries to post his work on how he believes the universe started and other very intellectually based documents, things that have great intellectual property to them. When he tries to publish his work, people don't accept that. People don't take it seriously because he doesn't even have a degree. As far as they know, he's just a high school dropout. Uh, so overall, it's a very tragic story. And then he immediately contrasts that. It's a compare and contrast chapter. He immediately contrasts that with another individual. He was Robert Oppenheimer. It's his name. Robert Oppenheimer. I believe he was German. He moved to America. His parents moved to America. They were very successful, and Oppenheimer himself was a genius, much like Christopher Langan. And from a very early age, he decided that he would only study theoretical and practical physics because he deemed everything all other possible studies to be below his intellectual level. And it turned out that he was right. So he started studying physics, and he made great. He published great work in physics until World War II started, and then he started before World War II started. He started doing experiments in the lab, which were kind of shady, and he would do things that were under the table and which were clearly against human rights violation and so on, animal rights violation. So he was immediately told to leave the university and that he won't. He was put on probation basically. Uh, but later in his life, he was still young when the war started, and he was thought to have joined the Communist Party, which was a very big deal back then because the Cold War was just around the corner, and there was a fear in America of the communist. But despite all of that, despite all the things going against him, previously given probation, people thinking that he might be with the communist, his overall unhinged personality, despite all of those, he was still hired to help create the atomic bomb, which America later used to bomb Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So some might argue that wasn't really a good thing for him to join in, but at the end he did something that he wanted. He was successful in a sense. So that's the two stories that he puts out in the like the first half to the first 2/3 of the chapter, and then the last third, he analyzes and deconstructs the differences and similarities between these two stories. They both the similarities are obvious that both of these individuals were geniuses, of their own, of a different class. Yet one was very successful and the other was not. And by the time that Gladwell reaches this point in the book, it's very obvious for the reader. The reader knows what he's going to say before he even says it, and that's what I really like about Gladwell's style. He creates such a flow to it that you don't the reader, as a reader, you'll know what's gonna happen, right? And some people might not like that, and that might not be the best thing in a narrative story. But this sort of nonfiction, research-based oriented kind of a piece, it's actually very interesting to have that flow in this sort of nonfiction writing. But that's just a tangent. So going back to the connection, Gladwell states very explicitly that the main factor that differentiates Langen from Oppenheimer is class. It truly is class, and class meaning that Christopher Langen came from a very broken down family. As a child, he wasn't told that, yeah, sure, life will have its share of problems, but you can overcome those problems. Langen wasn't told that. He was just given a life where he was constricted, and he was never told what to do with those constrictions. And on the other hand, Oppenheimer, he came from a very privileged family, where his parents were very successful. I think one was a businessman and the other was a lawyer. So very privileged lifestyle. And he said that when Oppenheimer was a child, he was the difference in parenting. And this is his argument. Another factor to what makes someone successful is the kind of parenting they received. So the type of parenting Oppenheimer received was very optimistic, was very supporting, very encouraging. Where his parents told him that the problems that you face, there will be problems, but you have to work around them. And they put him in clubs, and they taught him how to speak in public, and they developed something inside of their child, inside of Oppenheimer, which psychologists now deem as practical intelligence. So in the previous chapter, Gladwell talks about IQ, which is the intelligence quotient, which is believed that people are born with. Right? So that's just something you have when you're born with. But there's another sort of intelligence, which is practical intelligence. This is the sort of intelligence that helps a kid get out of trouble, just by talking his way out of trouble, or getting a job that he doesn't, or a person getting a job which they don't truly deserve, but they get it just by mingling with the people, knowing how to deal with people. That sort of practical intelligence is very important, as Gladwell states that even more than intelligence that you're born with, practical intelligence, Gladwell argues, will take a person further. So overall, my reaction to this is I really feel for Christopher Langen. He has such a great gift. He's still alive, but he was given such a great gift of intelligence. Yet because of other factors, he was never able to use it, and now he just sits there on his farm, not living up to his true potential, and that's what I'm scared of. Uh, as a personal connection to me, what how this chapter connected to me, I'm scared of these things, and it kind of makes me feel that it's sort of unfair in a way, because a person's success, if you agree with what Gladwell is saying about opportunity, a person's success is so much larger in scope and understanding than than just my actions, for example. So I can't be successful because of what I do. Success is so much larger, and this is what I thought even before reading this book. And this book is just strengthening that assumption of mine, that to be successful, you cannot do it alone. And I really agree with that message.